Effective immediately. Sadie Locke will be stepping in as the new head of product development. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd just finished presenting the final rollout for our AI security protocol, my system. Built from the ground up across 17 sleepless months, and barely had time to sit before Liam Roussel, son of our CTO, made the announcement. There was no warning, no meeting, no conversation, just a sentence, dropped like it was a natural transition. I sat still, stunned. As Liam smiled across the room like a proud intern delivering good news, Sadie stood beside him, glowing in a cream-colored sheath dress, hair blown out perfectly. She looked like a magazine cover, not a systems lead. She had no credentials, no Git history, no badge swipe into engineering, but she had Liam, his fiancé, his choice, his announcement. I kept my eyes forward. No one looked at me. Not the junior devs I mentored, not the PM I'd trained for 2 years, not even Henry from QA, who once told me I was the only reason he didn't quit. Silence spread like a stain. Not one person asked why. I stood slowly when the meeting ended, nodded once, and walked out. No one followed. Outside, in the sunless parking lot, I sat in my car with the door shut, trying to remember how to breathe. My phone buzzed. A reminder from Mercy General, Mom's next chemo session, Thursday. 11:40 a.m. I swallowed hard. I was the one carrying the insurance. Losing this job wasn't just losing a title, it was losing safety, stability, her care. And what made it worse? Sadie wasn't even on payroll. I found out later she hadn't signed a single HR document. They hadn't replaced me with someone better. They replaced me with someone convenient, beautiful, polished, unqualified. And they thought I'd go quietly. But what Liam didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 years ago, I helped build a system buried deep in our architecture, one designed to protect people exactly like me, and in that moment of humiliation, that system woke up. I thought the worst part was over. Liam had made his announcement, and no one had spoken up. No protest, no raised eyebrow. Just a room full of people too polite, or too strategic, to acknowledge I had been erased. But when I returned to my desk, I realized that erasure was only just beginning. The office sounded normal, keyboards clicking, Slack notifications chiming, someone laughing near the break room. But as I walked past the rows of desks, I felt it. A shift. A quiet tightening in the air. Conversations stopped when I got close. Smiles disappeared. Eyes stayed glued to screens. I sat down slowly and tapped in my credentials. A red message flashed. Access denied. User not authorized. I tried again. Same result. I opened GitHub. Locked. Staging server. Locked. Internal docs. Logged out. I clicked through the admin panel and stared at my profile. All permissions revoked. Status. Inactive. My heart pounded, but I kept my face still. 14 years of work, wiped away in 30 minutes. I looked up, scanning for someone, anyone, to confirm this was a mistake. But everyone was suddenly busy, heads down, no eye contact. I stood, walked over to Logan's desk. We'd pulled a dozen late nights debugging together. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did something change with access levels this morning?" He glanced up. His eyes flicked past me, never quite landing. I think you'd need to talk to Liam about that." That was it. No sympathy, no explanation, just a verbal firewall. I walked out of the open floor and into the old archive room, somewhere no one went anymore. I shut the door behind me, leaned against a filing cabinet, and felt the weight of everything hit me at once. I was gone, not fired, not reassigned, just quietly deleted. My phone buzzed. A Slack message from Quinn. "Hey, sorry if this is overstepping, but the IEP just triggered. You know it, right? It listed your name, Subject M. Hollis. Evaluation active. I blinked. IEP. The invisible system I helped build. Buried. Forgotten. It had activated. Something I'd made still remembered me. I opened my old laptop and pulled up a hidden interface, one only 3 people had ever seen. And there it was, glowing on the screen. IEP triggered. Subject M. Hollis. Evaluation active. They may have stripped my title. They may have erased my access. But the system remembered what mattered. And it was already watching. They erased me from the system. But they forgot I built a different one, 3 years ago. When our engineering team doubled in 6 months, the CTO asked for a way to track performance, something immune to favoritism. Merit-based, he called it. I delivered. I named it the Invisible Evaluation Protocol, or IEP. It tracked real contributions, code commits, bug fixes, architecture changes, documentation. No fluff, no politics, just work. Everything fed into a secure backend, encrypted and routed to an off-network node, a location only 3 people knew about. I was one of them. Officially. IEP had been shelved after our Series B, but unofficially, I kept it alive. I didn't trust the system to stay fair forever. Now, sitting at my apartment desk with my old laptop open, I was about to see if it remembered me. I entered the root password, fingers slower than they used to be, heart steady, breath controlled. The screen flickered once, then populated line by line. IEP status, triggered event, leadership displacement, subject, M. Hollis, evaluation, active. I swallowed. My hands hovered over the keys. Hesitant now, not with fear, but with weight. Whatever I was about to read wasn't just data. It was everything they had tried to delete. I pulled the ranking log. And there it was. My name, M. Hollis, IEP score, 96.4%. Time span, last 18 months. Metrics, 212 commits, 63 bug resolutions, 17 architectural rewrites, 4 critical deploy saves. Second place sat nearly 8 points below me. And Sadie? No entry, not a single record. No valid contributions detected for subject S. Lock. The system didn't know titles. It didn't care about who you were dating. It only knew the truth. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious, just steadied. In the office, they saw me vanish. In this system, I never left. I saved a local copy, encrypted it, and stored it in a drive labeled failsafe. My pulse slowed, breath settling into something calm, something quiet, but deliberate. Then, a new notification blinked in. Calendar invite, company engagement celebration, Friday, 3:00 p.m., hosted by Liam Roussel and Sadie Locke. Of course. I stared at it for a long moment, then closed the window. They were throwing a party, but the system had already picked its lead, and it wasn't her. There's a particular kind of silence that settles when the people who betrayed you throw a party in your face. Friday afternoon, the entire product floor was invited to the break room turned ballroom. The whiteboards had been wheeled aside. Fairy lights hung across the ceiling. A champagne tower stood at the edge of the snack table. Music played, some trendy synth-pop track that made the whole space feel like a staged proposal. And in the center, dressed in a sleek blush dress that probably cost more than my last monthly paycheck, stood Sadie Locke. She raised a glass with polished confidence. Thank you all for coming. Liam and I are thrilled to celebrate not just our engagement, but this next chapter for the company we love. Our company. She hadn't worked a day in it. She had no email address until 3 weeks ago. And yet here she was, standing on the bones of the system I built, speaking like she'd wired its architecture with her bare hands. Liam wrapped an arm around her waist. We're honored to announce that our partnership with Quantisec is nearly finalized. A $2.1 billion licensing deal, one of the largest in our sector's history. Cheers erupted. I didn't clap. And I couldn't have done this. He continued, smiling at her like she was the second coming of Jobs and Musk combined. Without Sadie, her leadership, her strategic vision, and her product instincts have reshaped everything. Reshaped? I watched the CTO, his father, step up beside them and place a proud hand on Sadie's shoulder. "She's already earned our trust," he said. "And soon, she'll have her stake in the company to prove it." I blinked. Later, while slipping out early, I passed by the kitchenette and heard Sadie speaking to a junior associate. Her voice hushed but gloating. "Oh yeah," she said, laughing softly. "It's all in the prenup. Once the funding hits, I get a small equity slice. Incentive alignment, you know?" The associate chuckled nervously. "But what about Marin?" Sadie scoffed. "She doesn't even have access anymore. Let her sulk. It's already done." I stepped back before they saw me. Disbelief burned through me. Not loud, not sharp, bitter, low, lingering. They didn't just replace me. They were rewriting the story in real time, painting her as the visionary while I stood in the margins like a forgotten footnote. Back at my desk, I stared at my dark screen, then at the encrypted drive in my bag. Failsafe. The only thing in this entire building that still recognized what I'd done. I was invisible to them, but the system hadn't forgotten me, and neither had I. I didn't cry after the engagement party. I didn't storm out or scream or break anything. I just went home, took off my coat, brewed a cup of tea with hands that barely shook, and powered up the machine they thought I'd forgotten. It was an old laptop, heavier than it should be. The R key sticky from a spilled energy drink 4 years ago. But it held something no new device did. A shadow copy of the original IEP testing environment. The one I used back when I still believed good systems could protect good people. I opened the terminal and keyed in my old root password. It still worked. Of course it did. I built it to remember me. The dashboard flickered to life, deep in the directories. I navigated to a hidden subfolder called Logs Proof Chain Archive. I started with the most recent evaluation window, 18 months. The system filtered and parsed thousands of entries. A soft beep confirmed the analysis had compiled. My name appeared at the top of the list. M. Hollis, 96. 4%. Validated contribution rate commits, 212. Bug resolutions, 63. Critical deploys, 4. Architectural contributions, 17. Verified chain, past no padding. No inflated numbers, just cold, hard proof of real work. I exhaled. Then, out of habit, I drilled into one of the old log files. A late-night commit I'd barely remembered. Timestamp, Friday. 2:14 a.m. Location, Mercy General Hospital. Public guest Wi-Fi. Security patch deployed for back-end overflow vulnerability. Notes. Pushed from waiting room. Mom's vitals stable. My throat tightened. That was the night the system nearly crashed, and no one else was answering support calls. They praised Liam the next day for holding things together. He hadn't even logged on. I pulled up the company's current project repo just to check. As expected, my name was gone. From every commit, every document, every contribution, scrubbed. It wasn't a mistake. It was a rewrite. But IEP had captured everything. Each timestamp, each line of code, each credential hash that pointed to me and no one else, even if the corporate record had been bleached clean. The truth lived in the metadata. A knock at my office door made me jump. It was Quinn, holding a flash drive. "I pulled this from the last mirrored server," he said quietly. "They haven't shut down the legacy instance yet. You should have it." He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't need to. I nodded. "Thank you." After he left, I loaded his backup into the archive, ran a cross-reference. It all matched. At the bottom of the IEP report, a single line blinked to life. Top contributor, verified chain, M. Hollis. No applause, no audience, just quiet certainty. The truth was here, undeniable, untouched. They could erase the surface, but I still owned the foundation. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I needed proof that mattered in their world. Paper proof. Legal proof. So I went back to the last place they forgot to scrub. The investor data room. The Series B documentation was hosted on a dusty old virtual drive, buried under folders labeled Legacy and Archival. It had been years since anyone had touched these files, not since our legal team finalized the round. I started skimming. Hundreds of pages, term sheets, cap tables, compliance documents, most of it boilerplate. But then I found it. Appendix E, Performance Clause Addendum, Institutional Safeguards. I read every word, twice, and there it was. All licensing and deployment contracts exceeding $1 billion in valuation must be authenticated by the highest-rated internal technical contributor, as determined by the proprietary evaluation protocol developed in Q2 of FY 2019. I stared at the language. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a legal clause, binding, buried in the framework of the company's own growth capital. And it referred, explicitly, to IEP, the system I'd built. I kept reading. A signature block appeared at the bottom of the page, and just below the black line, in smooth digital ink, was the name, Chief Technology Officer, C. Roussel. My fingers curled. He had signed this. The same man who stood next to Sadie in the break room, toasting her as the company's next visionary, had once believed in the integrity of what I built, back when he still called me his most trusted engineer. And now he was about to close a $2.1 billion licensing deal that would collapse without my signature, because the clause was clear. IEP wasn't just a buried protocol, it was a gatekeeper, and that changed everything. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Slow and sharp. In that moment. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel erased. I felt necessary. I thought back to one of our earliest investor calls. The day we pitched IEP as a way to counter internal politics. Back then. One of the lead partners, Elliot Grain, had said, "I've seen what nepotism does to good code. We'll only invest if there's protection built in." I'd nodded, quietly. I knew his story, how he'd been forced out of his own startup when the founder handed his CTO title to a brother-in-law. I'd built IEP for that man as much as I built it for myself. And now that very clause, the one I thought no one would ever use, had become my anchor. I opened a new folder on my desktop, labeled it, Clause, Trigger, Active. Then I drafted an email. No threats, no emotion, just an attachment, a clipped image of the clause, and one line, as per Section E, deployment authorization remains pending. I hit send. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance tilt. Not in my favor, just back to center. They rang a bell in the middle of the office, a literal brass bell, mounted on the wall near the elevator. Something I'd never seen used in my 14 years here. But today, Liam slammed his hand against it like a victory gong. Laughter erupted around him. Someone popped a bottle of champagne. I heard Sadie squeal. "We did it!" Liam shouted. "Deal closed!" I sat frozen at my desk. From across the room, confetti burst from a party popper. Balloons bobbed near the glass wall. A banner appeared on Slack. Quantasec licensing agreement. Signed and sealed? People were clapping. Some were hugging. Quinn looked over at me. Confused. I just nodded once. As if I understood. As if I believed it. Because for a moment, I did. Maybe the clause didn't matter. Maybe the system could be bypassed. Maybe they'd found some way to render me irrelevant again. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last week drained in an instant. I stared at my screen. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then they dropped. I opened a new document. Subject line, resignation letter. Effective. Immediately, I couldn't fight anymore. Not if they'd signed the deal. Not if the system had been ignored. Not if everything I'd built had been quietly overwritten with celebratory gifs, and Sadie's perfectly curled hair, and Liam's smug press release. My hand trembled. I minimized the document and stood, walked slowly to the back corridor, and leaned against the cool metal wall of the stairwell. It smelled like old paint and forgotten paper. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. "Marin," I finally whispered. "Maybe it's time to let them have it." There was silence on her end. Then her voice came through, soft, but unshakable. "Or maybe it's time they learned what you've built." I closed my eyes. Just let that sit there. Her belief weighed heavier than my defeat. And yet, it steadied me. The vibration of my phone broke the moment. New email. Subject. Urgent. Quantasec licensing. Hold my breath caught. I opened it. Dear Orion Tech. The submitted contract is currently invalid due to missing technical validation. Per Section E, we require confirmation from the highest-ranked internal contributor, IEP system, prior to execution. Awaiting authentication. Legal counsel, Quantasec. I reread it. Then again. The deal wasn't done. They'd celebrated a draft, not a legally binding agreement, because they'd forgotten the one thing they couldn't scrub. Me. The clause was real. The system was active. The gate had not opened. And I, despite everything, still held the key. I walked back to my desk in silence. Past the laughter, past the streamers, past the people who never looked my way. They didn't know yet. But the celebration? It was premature. I didn't celebrate. I prepared. The moment Quantasec flagged the contract as invalid, I knew exactly what needed to happen. There wouldn't be another warning, no second email. Just a window, and I had no intention of letting it close. I opened the encrypted folder I'd labeled failsafe. Inside sat every architecture diagram, every deployment flow, every audit log tied to my credentials, signed, time-stamped, and traceable. Proof that the system was mine, not just in authorship, but in functional DNA. I compiled the package, added a one-page executive brief, and then paused before attaching it to the reply email. Instead, I opened a different document. A short, 2-paragraph cover letter. To Quantasec Legal and Acquisitions. Please find attached the technical validation documents per Section E, as per the IEP system. I am the current top-ranking contributor and authorized approver under clause governance. All further contractual matters are to be handled through Hollis Systems, LLC. Sincerely, Marin Hollis, founder and lead architect. Hollis Systems, LLC. I stared at the signature line for a moment. I had formed the LLC 2 years ago, on the advice of an old mentor who told me, "Never build billion-dollar ideas in someone else's name." Back then, it had felt like overkill. Now, it felt like a seatbelt snapping into place just before impact. I hit send. Then I stood, walked over to the break room, and poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee while the rest of the office buzzed with false confidence. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. By the time I returned to my desk, the reply had already landed. Marin, thank you for the clarification. We're initiating immediate voiding of the previous agreement. Please expect updated documentation reflecting your entity as the new technical lead on the transaction. Quantasec Legal Team. Just like that. No announcement. No grand reveal. Just one silent message that flipped the deal upside down. They had removed me from the system. I'd just removed them from the contract. I watched as Slack channels slowly shifted tone. First came the confusion, then the silence, then the private messages flying between execs. I could almost hear the moment Liam read the update. The party favors were still sitting by the bell. No one was ringing it now. By the end of the hour, the CTO had called an emergency leadership meeting, but the decision wasn't his anymore. It never really was. I sat back in my chair, breathing steady, for the first time in weeks. I wasn't reacting, I was directing. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. I didn't fight for a seat at their table. I built my own. And now, they were negotiating with me. The announcement came through on a Tuesday. No fanfare. Just a single line in the company-wide email. Effective immediately. CTO Charles Roussel has chosen to retire after over 17 years of dedicated leadership. We wish him well in his next chapter. There was no video call, no farewell, no cupcakes in the break room. Within minutes, Liam's profile vanished from the internal directory. His Slack status switched to deactivated. The head of product tag beneath Sadie's name on the org chart? Gone. And when I searched her handle on the system, user not found. Just like that. They were erased, exactly how they'd tried to erase me. Only now. The difference was this. I was still standing. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a clever quote. I didn't even respond to the whispers that started swirling through the lower levels of the company. I simply opened a new folder on my personal drive. Rebuild. Because while the company was busy pretending this had all been a smooth transition, I had already begun receiving quiet messages from people I thought had forgotten me. If you ever build something again, I'd follow you there. I stayed quiet because I was scared, but I never agreed with what they did. If you're starting something new, I want in. Some of them were interns when I first trained them. Others had sat in meetings beside me and said nothing when I was cut out. But now, they were reaching back, not to fix the past, but to help shape what came next. I rented a shared workspace, just a small room with natural light, decent coffee, and no one watching over my shoulder. Within a week, we had a name, a logo, a product roadmap. Hollis Systems wasn't just a holding company anymore, it was a starting line. On Friday morning, I held our first unofficial team sync. It was 5 of us, huddled around a folding table with laptops and notebooks and nervous excitement. Quinn showed up last, slightly breathless, holding 2 coffees and a bag of cables. He dropped them on the table, then looked around, grinning. No one said anything for a moment. Then Quinn cleared his throat. "I know you don't want speeches," he said, glancing at me. "But I'm gonna say this anyway." He pointed to me. "She didn't just build the system." He gestured around the room, voice steady. "She built all of us." No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence that followed was better than applause. It was the sound of something real, of being seen, of being remembered correctly. I opened my laptop, heart full, not with anger, not with fire, but with something much rarer. Peace. They called it a transition ceremony. But for me, it felt like coming home. The glass doors of Quantisec's new innovation wing slid open with a soft hiss. Light poured in from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The walls were still bare in places, fresh paint. Quiet echoes. But at the center of the lobby stood something solid, something permanent, a brushed steel plaque, mounted on a granite pedestal. I stopped in front of it, at the top, etched clean and proud in serif letters, Chief Architect, Maren Hollis. For a second, I just looked at it, not in disbelief, not in awe, but with the calm, steady breath of someone who had already claimed the title long ago. Long before anyone else thought to carve it in metal. This time, there was no CTO to take credit, no VP's son to rewrite history, no fiancé with a borrowed vision. Just me. I ran my fingers lightly across the surface, cold, real, unmistakably mine. Below the name, in smaller font, was a quote. I hadn't written it, but someone on the team had pulled it from one of my archived Slack messages, one I typed. Late one night, in the midst of fighting for a system no one believed would ever matter. Invisible doesn't mean irrelevant, and silence isn't surrender. My throat tightened. In the weeks since I walked away from my old company, everything had changed. Quantisec had requested full deployment of the IEP framework, this time as a core governance protocol. No longer hidden, no longer buried. Now. Every technical contributor would be evaluated by their work, not their title. The system would be transparent, encrypted, and fair, and they asked me to lead it. I didn't hesitate. I brought Quinn. I brought 3 others who'd once sat across from me in silence, now rising to become architects of something better. Together. We weren't just building software, we were rebuilding trust. Earlier that morning, I stood in front of our new internal team, walking them through IEP's relaunch. One of the junior engineers asked, "Why not rename it? Make it yours?" I smiled. "It already is," I said. "But it was never about the name. It's about what it protects." Now, standing in this lobby, I realized something I hadn't before. For so long, I'd fought to be recognized, to stay seen, to not disappear under someone else's ambition. But recognition is different when it's earned, not demanded, not taken, offered, given freely, and written in stone. A soft chime played over the speakers. The ceremony was about to begin. I didn't straighten my blazer. I didn't adjust my hair. I stepped forward as I was, fully, quietly, whole. And as the doors to the conference room opened, someone whispered behind me, "She's the reason the system works now." They were right. I wasn't just authorized, I was remembered. And finally, I was seen. There were times I felt invisible, like everything I built could be erased with a single decision made behind a closed door. But this story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming what's rightfully yours without losing who you are. If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or told to stay silent, know this: your work, your voice, your worth, they matter. Maybe you haven't seen your name on a plaque yet, but the impact you leave behind is real. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a similar situation? Let's talk about it. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found this story powerful, consider hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs inspiration, and subscribing for more stories like this. Every click helps these stories reach more people and reminds the world that quiet strength is still strength.